Okay, so it is finally here, a reel that everyone and their mama's been asking me to do a review on, and that of course is the Shimano Curado BFS, a reel that is probably the most important reel in bait finesse history, and I'll go more into that later. Now before I unbox this reel, I want to give thanks to Bait Finesse Empire on Instagram, and you guys need to thank him as well, because if it wasn't for him letting me know that American Legacy had these right-handers in stock, I'd still be waiting for Tackle Warehouse to ship mine to me. So go on Instagram and follow Bait Finesse Empire, and also check out his online shop. Apparently he's got a shop that specifically deals in bait finesse tackle. It looks like he's got reels, rods, baits, lines, etc. Pretty much everything you need to get started in bait finesse. So once again, follow Bait Finesse Empire on Instagram and check out his shop. Okay, so let's get into this. Now full disclosure, I've had this reel sitting on my table for a couple of weeks now. I've just been waiting closer till iCast before I did this video. But let's open up this box. Alright, paperwork. Reel, oil, and let me put this off to the side. Oh shit. Apparently we even get BFS oil as well. I'll show that to you guys in a minute. Alright, finally. Shimano Curado BFS XG right-handed model. Did you guys study this reel? Now of course anyone who has been into bait finesse for a while probably knows this reel pretty well already, because there is another reel that this is based on. Malaysia. You can see they are keeping with the current Curado color scheme. Kind of wish they would have went with something different personally, but yeah, check this reel out. Alright, so I'm going to do my customary inspection. It's not going to take long, but yeah. So as expected, that inspection really didn't take too long, but let's start the video off like this. Now one of the most popular things I get asked to do is to do, I guess, a reel arsenal video, where I basically make a video showing you guys all my bait cast reels. Now for one thing, that video would be way too long, and for another, I'm really not interested in doing one. But I will do this. Now I know that this video will get at least 1,000 views within the first couple of hours, so if you guys give me 1,000 likes, I will do a bait finesse arsenal video where I show you guys all my bait finesse reels, from all my JDM reels to all my budget AliExpress reels, and even reels that I've converted into bait finesse reels from stock. So yeah, if you give me 1,000 likes, I will do that video. And just to let you guys know, my BFS reel count I think is well over 20. And of course I'll give you guys a mini review of each reel and my experience with it. So next up, I'm going to address what BFS is and what BFS isn't. Now BFS is simply an acronym for Bait Finesse System. Now obviously the bait in Bait Finesse System stands for bait cast reel, and then the system means that generally when a company comes out with a BFS reel, they'll also come out with at least 1 or 2 matching BFS rods, therefore creating a system. So in a nutshell, all bait finesse is finesse fishing with a bait caster instead of a spinning reel. Now of course, to be able to effectively cast the lighter lures that you use in finesse fishing, the bait casters have to be specially engineered to be able to do so with shallow ultralight spools, retuned drag systems, and sometimes even standalone brake systems. Now, what bait finesse isn't is micro fishing. Now, this is a misconception that finesse fishing is targeting small fish, and that's not true. Bait finesse started in Japan in the bass fishing world, where they were targeting the same big bass, but since their waters are so pressured and also often very clear, they had to resort to finesse fishing, and apparently a lot of them preferred using bait cast tackle instead of spinning for those finesse techniques. Now, of course, you will catch a lot of smaller fish using smaller lures, but my two personal best bass of 5.2 and 5 pounds both came on bait finesse gear. Now, I will say this though, since then bait finesse has evolved a lot, and it has moved over into the trout world, where BFS fishing for trout in small streams and rivers is starting to catch on all over the world. And also in Europe, they are using bait finesse gear to target huge yellow perch as well as trout and other species. And then naturally, bait finesse has transitioned over into the saltwater world as well, where I guess they're targeting fish with smaller mouths. So any fish that has a smaller mouth that can't take a normal sized bass lure, you can also target with bait finesse. So before we get into the meat of the review, I'm going to explain exactly why the Curado BFS is probably the most important BFS reel in bait finesse history. And to explain that, I'm going to go briefly into the history of bait finesse here in America. Now, the Curado BFS is the first official bait finesse reel sold in America by Shimano, but it's not the first BFS reel to officially be sold here. About 10 years ago, DAIWA brought the Pixie to America in the form of the Pixie Type R, and also GARCIA sold the first generation REVO LTX as well. And in fact, Tackle Warehouse also imported some DAIWA BFS reels like the SS Air, the Alphas Air, and the SV Lite, and also sold them here in America. Now, with bait finesse reels being offered way back in 2011, why hasn't it caught on until now? Well, that's because the Pixie Type R cost $500 and the REVO LTX cost $380. So if there was an actual demand for BFS reels here in America back then, the high cost of the tackle pretty much snuffed out any growing interest. And that was proven with the fact that neither GARCIA or DAIWA chose to offer any replacements for those reels in their next generation lineups. So bait finesse was pretty much known as a very small niche market for people with money. Now fast forward to 2017, a YouTube channel named BCSG Fishing changed the BFS world by releasing videos of a little red and black reel called the Surinoya Whirlwind XF50, or just XF50 for short. Now this reel only cost about $55 at the time, but it had awesome bait finesse capabilities, and it showed the world that a BFS reel doesn't need to cost $500 to perform well. So being a fellow BFS junkie like BCSG, I ordered an XF50 and released my own videos on the reel, confirming everything he showed us was true. And the initial video I released was one of my most popular ones at the time. Now this really surprised me because I didn't realize that there was that much interest in BFS fishing. So then other YouTubers started joining in and releasing their own videos on the XF50, and I suppose tackle companies in China started taking notice because they started releasing newer and better BFS style reels at a really fast pace, starting with the legendary Fishband GH100, a reel that copied Shimano bait finesse technology and sold it to you for only around $60. Now, I was the first YouTuber to come out with a review on this reel, and the combined videos went past the 120,000 view mark. And once again, I was very shocked because I thought that BFS was still a small niche market. So fast forward about another year or so, and AliExpress is completely flooded with BFS style reels that all cost only around $60. So then KASTKING decided to jump in on the BFS market and came out with the Zephyr, a reel that they officially sold in America through Amazon for only $70. So naturally I got one for myself and did a couple of videos on it, and the combined views on those videos went well over 100,000, with about half the views coming from viewers here in the United States. So needless to say, with the help of AliExpress budget BFS reels and YouTubers like me and many others showing the world that you can get a top performing bait finesse reel at an affordable price, I guess Shimano saw that the timing was right and decided to officially bring bait finesse into the mainstream by coming out with the Curado BFS. And they did it the right way in my opinion. And that's because they used probably the most recognizable name in bass fishing reels, the Curado, to introduce bait finesse to the biggest bass fishing market in the world by far, and that of course is the United States, therefore making it mainstream. But it's not just timing. They also priced the reel appropriately at $190 instead of $500 like DAIWA foolishly did with their Pixie Type R. And what validates all of this is the fact that out of all the new spring release tackle videos that Shimano came out with a few months ago, the video for the Curado BFS got the most views by far at well over 70,000, and that was more than double of that of the next reel. Now the significance of all this is that if the Curado BFS does well, surely other companies are going to come out with their own BFS reels to compete, and when companies compete, we the consumers win. Now with that being said, if any companies out there are watching this like LEWS, Abu Garcia, Quantum, or any others, I am offering my consulting services if you are looking to develop your own bait finesse system. Just shoot me an email at the address on the screen. Okay, so now that the little history lesson is over, it's time to see if this Curado BFS meets my high bait finesse standards. Now, about a year or so ago, I released a video called The Beginner's Guide to Bait Finesse, and in that video, I listed off 3 requirements that I have when purchasing a bait finesse reel. Now, the first requirement was that the spool must weigh no more than 9 grams, and that's an empty spool, and if the spool has a bearing, that's without the bearing, and this is for reels with magnetic brake systems. Now speaking of brake systems, the second requirement was that the reel needs to have a very strong braking system, and then the third requirement is that the reel needs to have a very smooth drag with a very easy startup. So let's see how Shimano did with this Curado BFS in meeting my requirements. Okay, so as you can see, I pulled a scale out, and it's time to find out if the Curado BFS spool meets my weight requirements. Now for all you longtime subscribers, you'll see that this scale is brand new. It's the first time I'm using it, and I bought this scale specifically just to weigh spools. Okay, so interestingly enough, in Shimano's promotional video for the Curado BFS, they stated that the spool weighed 9 grams. So I'm pretty sure that they watched my Beginner's Guide to Bait Finesse video when coming up with the spool weight for this Curado BFS. Now the question is that 9 grams on the dot? Is it 9.2 grams, 9.5 grams, or even 9.9 grams? Because I guess technically the spool could weigh 9.9 grams and you can still say it weighs 9 grams. So taking a closer look at the spool, you'll see it's very shallow. It's got that green color. Personally, I wish they would have given it a silver color, something more distinctive to separate this reel from the rest of the Curado lineup. It's got the traditional Shimano long spool shaft that looks to be made of steel, not aluminum, and there is no bearing, but you can see it's very ported on the inside as well as the outside. Okay, so moment of truth, let's see what this spool weighs. Is it 9 grams on the dot or on the heavier side of 9 grams? Oh damn, 8.867. So we're gonna reweigh that. Yep, once the spool settled, 8.867, so just almost 0.2 of a gram lighter than advertised. That's pretty awesome. It's always nice when you get a spec higher than advertised. And while I have this scale out, I went ahead and pulled out another spool of another reel, 8.812. Now I'll show you what reel this spool belongs to later on in the video, but I just wanted to make sure this scale was accurate, and it is, because this spool weighs the same on all my other scales as well. Now if you're wondering how I came up with that magical number of 9 grams maximum for a bait finesse spool, that's because I've probably owned well over half the bait finesse reels that have ever been made, and I've tried pretty much all the bait finesse technologies out there. And what I've done was I've taken pretty much almost all of my bait finesse reels and I took them out to the field and did some cast measurements, and I found that the reels that have 9 gram spools and under can cast a true 1/8 ounce lure at least 75 feet or 25 yards, and a true 1/16 ounce lure at least 60 feet or 20 yards. Now, of course, this is with the appropriate line and ultralight rod. Now these numbers are mostly based on using an ultralight bass rod, which is pretty stiff. So if you use a more moderate tapered trout rod, then of course those numbers will go up. And just to show you what a true 1/16 ounce lure is, here's one right here. This is a little trout spoon. Look how small it is, smaller than my thumb. And here's another one. And here is a imitation Yozuri snap bean. If you take this hook off, this lure weighs 1.7 grams, which is right at 1/16 of an ounce. And this is one of the lures that I used in the field to get my measurements. So according to my field measurements, this Curado BFS should be able to launch a 1/8 ounce hard bait at least 25 yards and a 1/16 ounce hard bait at least 20 yards. So now that we know that the Curado spool meets my minimum weight requirements and actually comes in slightly lighter than advertised, let's talk about the next requirement, and that of course is going to be strong brakes. Now unfortunately there's no real way to know whether a braking system is too weak or not, other than going out and casting the reel of course. But I can pretty much 100% guarantee that the Curado BFS brakes are more than strong enough, because for one thing, it is a Shimano and they're not going to release anything out onto the market that hasn't thoroughly been tested by their pro staff. And number two is that Shimano has equipped the Curado BFS with the FTB FINESSE brake system, which is the most advanced magnetic brake system in the world, except for their own DC digital brakes. And let me show you why that is. Okay, so here is the FTB FINESSE brake system. As you can see, it is magnetic, and there are 2 banks of magnets with 4 magnets each for a total of 8 magnets, and they are on each side of this brake hub. And what makes this system so special is that it is dynamic, meaning that the amount of magnetic force changes during the cast, and that's because Shimano designed these brakes with springs underneath one side of each bank of magnets, which I'm going to show you right now. So right there you can see that one side of each bank of magnets is spring loaded. Now it doesn't move very much, but it doesn't need to. So what happens is, during the most important part of the cast, which is the beginning when the spool is spinning at its fastest, these magnets will pop up closer to the spool, giving the appropriate amount of braking force. And then towards the tail end of the cast, they'll retract back down, giving less braking, therefore giving you a little bit extra casting distance. Now, the great thing about these brakes as well is that 2 of these magnets are detachable in the event that you might need even less braking force. So if you see these magnets with the letter N there, you can actually remove them just like so. So there's one, and then there's the other. Now these others you can't take off, I believe they're glued in, but you wouldn't want to anyway. Now I've done a video on this where I took both of my Shimano Aldebarans and did a cast comparison, one of them running all 8 magnets and one of them running only 6. And if you're really casting heavier BFS lures like up to 5 grams, maybe even a 1/4 ounce, you probably can run only 6 magnets, but I recommend that you use all 8 magnets at all times, especially if you're casting really light lures. So basically these magnets will interact with the unported section right here of the spool. So it works like this. Now it's not spinning very much because I have the magnets popped out to their maximum position for maximum braking. So let me put these down to the minimum position and show you guys what it can do free spool wise. Of course, you adjust that by turning this external dial out here. It does not click, no big surprise, but it does allow for more minute, precise adjustments. So now it's retracted to the minimum position. So you can see it spins much longer and much freer as well. Now of course, being a dynamic magnetic system, it's similar to DAIWA's MagForce, but let me show you why this is superior to MagForce, especially for bait finesse. Now right here, I pulled out the spool of my DAIWA SS Air, and let's compare the spools with the Curado BFS spool. Now just ignore the fact that the SS Air spool has more portholes, it's got a longer spool shaft, and the fact that it's got a spool bearing. But let's take a closer look at these spools, particularly right here, and you'll see the difference and the advantage right there. With DAIWA's MagForce system, they have this inductor rotor that adds 1 gram of rotational weight to their BFS spools and even more weight to their non-BFS spools. So with Shimano's FTB system, they have eliminated all braking mechanisms from the spool, making it as light as possible. But unfortunately, with Shimano being such a conservative company, their bait finesse spools are still some of the heaviest when it comes to the JDM reels. But since these FTB brakes are so good, they actually allow Shimano BFS reels to cast just as good or cast better than competing reels that have lighter spools. So you are getting this highly advanced dynamic braking system in the Curado BFS. And it's the same system that you'll find on the $300+ Shimano Aldebaran BFS and the $400 Shimano CONQUEST BFS. So now that we got the spool weight and the braking system requirements out of the way, let's talk about the drag system. Now unfortunately, there's no real way to test just how smooth this drag is or how easy it starts up unless you actually hook into a fish that will pull drag. But I will say this, while Shimano is not known for their huge drag numbers like 20+ pounds or more, what they are known for is very smooth, very consistent drags with easy startups. And Shimano actually tuned the drag system on the Curado BFS specifically for finesse fishing, and that's because they gave this a maximum stopping power of 8 pounds. So if you think 8 pounds is a little too light, just remember this: what good is a 20-pound drag system if you're running 8-pound line or less? So I have full faith in this drag system that it will perform as needed. So now that we've gone over the most important features of the Curado BFS, I'm going to go over some of the cooler, more minor features. And most of them I discovered on my own. Shimano North America doesn't really advertise them. And we're going to start off with the first and most obvious one. And this is one that Shimano does advertise, and that is the fact that the Curado has a clicking drag. So hopefully you guys can hear that. Now, I'm not talking clicking drag star. I'm talking if a fish is strong enough to pull line, the drag will emit an audible click, letting you know line is being pulled out. Now, I personally don't care either way if a reel has a clicking drag or not, but it's definitely become a very popular and sought after feature for bait finesse reels, and just bait caster reels in general. And I can definitely understand, because it definitely adds a little bit more excitement to the fight if you hear that fish pulling line and the reel making the clicking noise. Now this next feature is going to differentiate this Curado BFS from all other current Shimano BFS reels, and that is that Shimano America has fitted the Curado with a very stout, thick power style handle instead of the thinner, more slender finesse style handles that you'll see on the other Shimano BFS reels like the ALDEBARAN, the CONQUEST, the Scorpion, and even the new SLX. And I guess that's probably because this is a reel designed for the North American bass market, and I'm assuming they think even though it's a finesse reel, us American anglers are going to be doing, I guess, power finesse, where we like to crank the bass in as fast as possible and land the fish. So once again, the Curado features a very thick, very beefy power style handle. That is 84 millimeters, so more of a finesse length, but it's more of a miniaturized Curado 200K handle. Now the next cool feature that Shimano doesn't tell you about that I'm going to show you is this. Now if you take a look at the inside of the spool there, you'll see that there is a gold anodized ring. Hopefully the camera will pick that up. But what this is this is a ridge or a rib that reinforces the spool in case you want to run light braid. Now in the past, particularly with DAIWA air reels, they advise that you don't run braid or heavier line because those lines have the potential to deform the spool. Now, I'm going to put a picture up of a deformed BFS spool for you, but Shimano somewhat solved that problem by adding that ridge on the inner diameter of the spool to help reinforce it in case you guys want to run light braid. And of course this is something that's been featured in all the other more expensive BFS reels from Shimano as well. So the last unspoken feature that I'm going to point out to you guys is my personal favorite, and let me show you this. Now look down in there, down in that hole, and then also take a look at this right here. Now what you're looking at are micro spool bearings stock. Now if you're wondering what the big deal is about micro spool bearings, let me explain. Now everything about a bait finesse reel is designed to get the spool moving with as little effort as possible. So that's why these spools are very lightweight and very shallow and don't hold as much line. But another way to add on to that is to swap out standard bearings for smaller micro bearings that have smaller balls, which take less effort to get turning. And in fact, that is probably the #1 most popular performance upgrade that bait finesse anglers do, is to swap out the factory spool bearings for some hybrid ceramic micro bearings to improve casting performance, particularly with the very lightweight lures. But also check this out, just something that the Shimano aficionados will notice, and that is if you look at the bearing, you'll notice that it's dark colored there, as well as this one. There's like a dark coating, and this is a trait of the higher spec JDM bearings that the JDM Shimanos get, and I believe only the most expensive US Shimanos get. So if you take a look at the standard Curado 200K, you'll see that that bearing is all silver, that there's no dark coating to it. Now these dark coated bearings seem to perform better than the, I guess, standard silver bearings. And in fact, I've proven in several tests that upgrading these bearings to even ceramic hybrid bearings will give you no performance upgrade. And yes, I've done this test with a Shimano BFS reel, where the stock bearings were swapped out for some hybrid ceramic micro bearings. I went out on the field and did some cast measurements, and there was little to no performance gain at all. So that means you get these high performance, high spec spool bearings as standard on your Curado BFS, and that's pretty cool. So what are my thoughts on the Curado BFS now that I finally got it in hand? and have had the chance to inspect it. Well, I think the best way to sum this reel up is to say that this is a $250 reel which is being sold for $190. And to prove that to you, I'm going to bring out this reel right here, and that is the JDM Scorpion BFS. Now, this reel came out in 2017, and for the longest time it was being sold for between $250 and $270. Now recently the prices have come down a little bit, so they can be found for about $240, but that's still a $50 premium over the Curado BFS. But the thing is, these reels are 95% the same. They're using the same frame and side plates, so that means both of them are sporting aluminum frames with graphite side plates. And this also means the Curado BFS will be amongst the most comfortable reels to palm, probably in the top 3, if not the most comfortable reel to palm. Now, since they're sporting the same frame and side plates, the weight on these reels are virtually the same. The Scorpion is slightly lighter, I think by 0.2 of an ounce. It's probably due to the difference in handles. Now, both of these reels are going to feature the same hypertensile brass gears, which I believe are colored black. They both are going to be sporting Shimano's X-Ship. They have the same number of bearings, 7+1. Both of them, of course, feature the clicking drag. They both have the same finesse-oriented knobs. They both are sporting aluminum drag stars. But more importantly, in the key areas for bait finesse, they are also virtually the same. They have virtually the same spool weight. Now remember that extra spool that I brought out to weigh? That was the Scorpion BFS spool, as you've probably already guessed. And it is only a fraction lighter than the Curado BFS. Now, of course, both of them are going to be sporting the highly advanced FTB dynamic brake system. And also, very importantly, both of them are going to be sporting micro bearings for the spool. And it appears that the Curado is getting the higher spec JDM bearings as well. So yeah, virtually the exact same reel. The only real difference is going to be, of course, your color scheme. I prefer the color scheme on the Scorpion personally. Of course, once again, the Curado is going to sport the beefier handle for us North American bass anglers. Spool tension is going to be slightly different, but neither of them click. And the only other difference I can think of is going to be internally, and this is going to be a part you'll probably never really see unless you take the reel apart. And that's going to be that the Scorpion's brake hub, as you can see, is a nice red color. Well, of course, the Curado is that plain black. And here's one more thing that I forgot to mention, and that is both reels come with both Bantam oil and BFS oil. Now, I'm assuming the Bantam oil is for the regular bearings, and the BFS oil is probably a little bit thinner for the micro spool bearings. So Shimano didn't skimp out on the oil for the Curado BFS either. Now, when it comes to the SLX BFS, while I don't have that reel, it looks like the only differences are going to be, other than the paint scheme, is that the Curado will have 2 more bearings than the SLX, and of course it's going to be sporting the beefier handle and the aluminum drag star. Well, I believe the SLX drag star, once again, is probably graphite. So yeah, when it comes to the grand scheme of things, so since this reel is pretty much 95% the Scorpion BFS, that means on paper it's only really going to lag behind the much more expensive ALDEBARAN and CONQUEST BFS by a few feet when it comes to casting BFS lures, but nothing too drastic. We're talking 10 foot or less. So I definitely say that this Curado BFS has turned out to be a good deal so far. So of course the next thing to do is see if those on-paper specs are going to translate into real-world casting performance, as I'm going to string this reel up with some line and we're going to do some casting tests just to see what this reel's true casting range is, and more importantly, how low can the reel comfortably cast. So I will see you guys out on the water.